tell the audience about how you got started in real estate.
Welcome to the Masters in Real Estate podcast with your host, Tanner Webster.
Okay. You're in Dallas and you're buying, are you doing all sorts of industrial or are you just doing outdoor storage mostly?
So my investing journey, yes, I'm in Dallas, but I started in industrial with a single tenant property. I kind of like was more of an LP, passive investor in a friend's deal. But I pivoted from residential, sold all of my residential, which was about 6 houses, transitioned into single tenant net leased industrial sites. And then in the last 3 to 4 years, I've really just focused on industrial outdoor storage, which for people that don't know, it's just kind of low coverage industrial. It can be parking lots, truck parking, drop lots, equipment storage. So that's where we've kind of focused on that niche the last couple of years, where the last acquisitions we've had have solely been industrial outdoor storage.
Was there a reason that you went that route? Was there any demand drivers or anything that said, I want to get in this asset class?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're exposed to all of the potential opportunities. I mean, I'm a pretty plugged in person, so I've heard about industrial outdoor storage for a while, but I've heard about a lot of other niche asset classes too. And it's a little bit of just falling into it and having an opportunity come up and then figuring out consciously what are my unique advantages and what can I do better than another investor. And for us, it was the management of, say, managed truck parking that we could do and pay more for sites that other investors couldn't buy or didn't want to buy.
How so? Like, how can you pay more for these sites?
Yeah, so I think that we have a better management team in-house, boots on the ground kind of thing, that can manage the truck drivers and the leases. Because just to, again, kind of back up high level, when people say that they have industrial outdoor storage or they have even a truck parking, there's two flavors, and we own both of these. But you can have a net leased property where you lease it to an operator that is a tenant that then subleases or has trucks on site. Or you can cut out the middleman and you as a landlord can be contracting directly with individual trucks. Or, in our case, 10 to 15 is like a fleet tenant. And then you'll have guys with like 2 to 6 trucks. And then you have maybe some onesie twosies where it's just an owner operator that has 1 truck. But dealing with all of those people is a lot of administrative work. You've kind of left the passive industrial landlord world and you've entered into an active business, more like self-storage or RV parking or mobile home parks.
So how does that work logistically with the trucking companies? Like, do you have a 5-acre site and you say, you companies, you get these 5 stalls over here and you guys get these 5 stalls? Like, how does that work mechanically?
Yeah,
and how do those leases work?
Stalls are numbered and marked. And it is sometimes an issue, especially we're running a 95, 96% occupancy site that people are tight. But I would say that's probably like a number one issue, that and maybe trash, tire removal. But yeah, we have numbered spaces. We've experimented with lots of different ways to delineate, especially on gravel. Can be a little bit harder to mark spaces where you can't just paint lines for the trucks.
So how do you do that? I would assume that you paint lines or like you throw up some wood or something like that. Is that?
Yeah. So we have experimented. We have just done spray paint. And it lasts maybe a surprisingly long time because the gravel actually doesn't move much. And even when it rains, it's spray paint. So it's kind of good. But eventually over time, it does wear away. So it may last a few months, but it's not a permanent solution. Some of the other ways we've experimented are doing rope. So we've got some like nylon, just bundle rope. And then you put stakes into the ground, like nails, rail, like 8-inch
rail ties or something. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you hammer those into the ground, and then it kind of pulls the rope. So those work well. They're durable. The trucks can drive over them. They don't get moved around. But they are kind of small and harder to see, even when you have a brightly colored yellow. Some of the other solutions, you talked about it. We can do the orange cones. So people will put like traffic barriers to try to put the corners. Again, those have the problem of people running over them, and then they kind of get dragged around. And so they do get torn up. But yeah, there's no real good solution for marking gravel. The last one, and I actually posted about this one on Twitter, was like there's a plastic framework that has dots, the road dots embedded in it. And the thing with this one is you actually have to dig up a little bit of your gravel section. You sink the plastic down, call it this deep, 3 inches, but then you fill the gravel back in. So it's kind of a in-the-ground solution with plastic dots above it. And again, I don't have to fill my whole yard with it, but I can just put them in the rows. And that might be a very durable solution. Maybe not cost-effective for retrofitting, but it could be effective when you're putting in a new site. So,
would you say that's what you're primarily targeting is like truck storage, or do you look for maybe outdoor storage for, call it like a lumber company for lay down space or something like that? What is your favorite of the uses, I guess?
Yeah, I think that I'm agnostic in terms of what your industrial outdoor storage use is. The managed truck parking that we do is great because I think the fundamentals are there in terms of 3 million trucks are on the road, but there's only 300,000 or 200,000 paid commercial spaces. And obviously a lot of those trucks are moving. They don't need parking, but I think there's a serious imbalance in the ecosystem. More and more cities are getting rid of truck parking. More industrial outdoor storage is being developed, and certainly no capacity is being added. There's no new supply. So I think those are good fundamentals for truck parking, but then it's also good for industrial outdoor storage. So I like all of your uses, construction materials, lay down yard. Those are all great. I mean, we have other net lease properties that use those types of tenants. I don't have a preference. I just go where the deals are within that space.
And when you are, I guess let's back up a little bit. So how are you typically finding those deals?
It's a mix of off market and on market. I think the most recent deal that we closed, which was back in February, we closed one at the end of February, a nice little 4-acre parcel. Check out my YouTube channel. I did a walkthrough of the site, one of the sites.
We'll put the link
4
in the
acres,
description.
9,000, has a little tilt wall warehouse with office. And that's, a great little example of what's in demand. But this was a listed deal, and it was listed for something like a 6 cap, 6.5. So it was just kind of a bonkers price for existing income. But we looked at it because we liked the area, and we own another site nearby, and we like this submarket. And when we dug into the numbers and we looked at the lease, for example, they had listed like the gross leases, or they listed the rent revenue, but they didn't specify triple net. And as you know, a lot of times, if you don't specify in this type of product class, people assume it's gross, which is not great. I mean, it's just suboptimal. But when we dug into the leases, they were actually a form of like a base modified triple net, but it was triple net. And I was like, oh, that changes your net income drastically. So we went under contract quickly at the ask price, kind of going in knowing that some things weren't adding up. And we knew that we were going to renegotiate. So we got permission to renegotiate with the tenants, get one of the tenants to sign a longer lease. And that worked out really well. They signed a higher rent amount and extended the lease and put it on a true triple net form. And so we're able to do all that during due diligence, and not, take any risk. So we're able to increase NOI right off the bat on that. It was also advertised as 4.5 acres, but we knew going in, we're looking at Google Maps and we looked at the areas like, it doesn't look like 4.5. I don't think it is. Of course, no survey. So we said, look, our offer was very clear. We're giving you this price based on 4.5 acres, like a price per foot kind of deal. And then when we got the survey back, it was 4 acres. And so we went back to the seller and said, hey, Mr. we were upfront. We went into the PSA really clear. And so we got an adjustment for that. So my point of all this is it wasn't necessarily a good deal when it was listed, and maybe a lot of people just pass on it. But because we liked the area, we ended up, we're closed at like a 10 cap, 11 cap.
That's good. That's really good.
That's great. I mean, I'll put my money down on that. And we got seller financing too. That was a little bit more of brinkmanship, I guess. Like right before, this was after due diligence. We're like, hey, we're having trouble with our lenders. They're at like 7%, 7.5%. And it's like, oh, it's just so expensive. We're like, we might just walk from the deal. Like, you can have our earnest money. And it was like, well, what if you give us seller financing? I was like, okay. So we got 5% seller financing. We had to increase the equity a little bit to cover his mortgage. But in terms of basis and, good cash returns, it was like the seller financing was something that he was toying around with at a higher purchase price, but we got the purchase price down and then we added in seller financing just to save a little bit more on basis, no origination fees, appraisal and all that stuff. But yeah, that's, again, my example of a good deal is not necessarily found, but it's negotiated. And there were a lot of things that we did to decrease our risk, increase net income, and
And you mentioned you were having difficulty financing that property. How is the financing? How are you typically trying to finance those? Are you going to banks, credit unions, step funds? How's that work?
Yeah, I'll qualify that. I mean, that was, I hope the seller's not listening, but we could have closed. It wasn't a mortal issue. So we use regional banks. This is kind of my general advice for all my clients and people in general. You want the smallest bank that will do your deal. You want to feel important. And this is a small loan. So if you're like at a $2 million loan size, 2.5, it's not a big loan. So you can't be at some of the bigger regional banks that, statewide conglomerate. It's not an important loan to them. But if you're doing a $3 million or a $2.5 million loan at a regional bank that has 4 branch locations or 6 locations, it's important. It's important to their quarter. Like, they care about it. It's a decent chunk, $25,000 for the originating guy. So that's my advice. And that's who we use on these. There are certain bigger banks like Bank of Texas or some of the Plains Capital guys that will like iOS, but then you might get a Frost Bank that doesn't like iOS. And so that's kind of that risk. I say, start with where you keep your money. You got to start a relationship, a deposits relationship, operating income, operating accounts, and put your money at those types of banks that are small. And then that should be your first stop when you're going to go for financing.
And one of the best parts about outdoor storage is it is kind of a covered land play. I mean, it is a covered land play. Do you ever look at developing that into the future, or what is kind of your business plan when you look at these deals?
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely it's covered land play. When we're buying infill, right? So we don't buy outside of any loops. In DFW and Fort Worth, right? We have the loop. We're not buying outside. We want to be pure, dense infill. And development is definitely something we're talking about. Maybe it'll lead to the next, how do you get your money equity side? But my partners and I were talking about, what do we do? Some of the best returns and the pinnacle of real estate is to be a developer. And especially on some of our bigger tracks, we could pop down a 10,000, 15,000, a 5 or a 10,000 square foot building, trying to stay under some sprinkler code requirements, and really juice the NOI of the bigger parcels with outdoor storage. And if we just develop that without being aggressive on FAR coverage, like floor area ratios, I think that the biggest downsides of being a developer is it's stressful because you're fighting with the city. And typically, in my experience, those fights within the city come because you're trying to maximize your buildable square footage, right? I mean, that's kind of development 101. You buy a site, you want to build the biggest building because that's what you get the most rent for, and that's what you get your biggest NOI, blah, blah, blah. That's common. But I think we could remove a lot of the stress from development some of the stress. Development's not easy, even if you're building something simple. But the point is, we could remove that element and maybe building a small building on 4 acres or 2 acres where we're not anywhere near coverage ratios, we're well within setbacks, all that stuff. It might make the city integration part less painful. And so, yes, I think we're really considering that because now we have a bunch of land. We have like 15 acres. And yes, it's a covered land play, but at some point it's also like, what do you want to do? You know, you can just sit on it. So we're talking about what it would look like in terms of costs and, you know, maybe doing a construction loan with our existing lenders, that sort of thing. But
primarily when you're looking at these sites, you're looking at it as like a 5-10 year hold or something off the get.
Yeah, I would say if you asked me 5 years ago, I wanted to do like this big roll up and I saw the trends coming, like before Zenith was too big, but Altera was just getting started and I was getting these random phone calls and I was like, man, I want to do a roll up and sell to Blackstone or something. And I thought at this point, maybe I'd have, 30 properties or 50 properties and I would sell. And I was like, yeah, that's just not realistic. But now I'm pivoting over to a never sell kind of mantra because I'm like, what do I need the money for? It really doesn't do anything. Cash flow is what makes you feel rich, combined with your stress. But, I love what I do every day with the law firm and then the real estate management. So I'm not too stressed. And I don't know what a big exit would look like in terms of my happiness or day to day. I would do the same thing. So part of me says, well, why not just hold everything? Let's not sell it. If we look into development, then we're going to be moving along that line of highest and best use. And I guess just manage these things. And then, you talk to these old guys and like, oh man, you bought this thing for $2 million 30 years ago, 20 years ago, and now it's worth 20 million. And I'm like, well, how do they get to that point where you're looking at them with awe? It's because they never sold, and they were certainly approached at multiple times by people. Hey, I'll give you 5 million. Hey, I'll give you 7 million. Hey, I'll give you 10 million. But if they just held it and said, I don't want to sell, then that's the only way you can get to 20 million, I guess is my point. So that's kind of what we're contemplating now in terms of what's the point of getting a quick hit? Because you kind of just have to redeploy the capital.
Yep. And going back to the financing question, so you're going local banks, local credit unions, somewhere along that. And then how are you typically raising equity for these?
Yeah. So everything, I guess, from my residential side was just, myself. And I guess I had partners, my brother and stuff. But everything we do now is partners equity. And so for people that don't know, there's kind of a spectrum. If you have, just Tanner himself, his family, he's really rich. He just buys everything by himself. And on the other extreme, you have like syndication, you have crowdfunding, 506 offerings. And that's where you're raising 50K checks or 100K checks from a lot of people. But in the middle is partners equity. And it's really a sweet spot of what I like. And it essentially involves, 2 or 3 people, maybe 4 or 5. And we all just say, okay, we're doing $1 million raise. How much do you want to put in, Tanner? Can I put you down for 200? And somebody else says, I'll put 3. And then I'll say, okay, I'll put in 2. What are we at? That's 500. No, 700K, right?
Yep.
I'm not good at math. Well,
whatever it is.
I am good at math, but the 700. Then we get 2 more people or 1 more person, 200, 100, and we're done, right? But now we have 4 people to do $1 million raise at varying commitments. But that's what I find is really effective. And I think it's really accelerated growth. It has given me a lot more GP. I can ask you, hey, shoot an email to the CPA and ask him what's going on with our K1s. Where's our extension, whatever. And it lets me take a vacation. Even if I could write the full $1 million check, I don't have somebody that's a second in command that I have asset management internally. And so what we have is maybe is like a group of asset managers that we're all competent. They all happen to be lawyers. That's just who my friends are that have disposable income, but they're competent. And so we can say things like, hey, we got some letter from the city for the landlord. Like, can you look into it? I'm on vacation. And if it's Tanner, and you can say, yeah, I can do that. But it's really a good way to, I think, grow without going the full syndicator route, which has its own issues besides cost and annoying people. Because that's the other thing too, is you don't get annoyed, right? All of our partners are sophisticated and they understand what's going on. And nobody's asking for their money back unreasonably. And so that's how we've grown. And it's really great that, my first couple of deals was like that, where we have a group, an email list, and people will just send out deals that, like, I get something under contract, I get the debt, and I have the pro forma, and like, here's the property. Like, do you guys like it? Do you want to put in? And then people will just respond on that email, put me down for however much. And the way I did it was the first time I was one of the more passive people, like a deal that somebody else had under contract. But then I was very helpful, I think, in doing things, kind of a function of my experience. But then the last couple of deals, I can be the one emailing it out, getting the debt, and that sort of thing.
Okay. You mentioned that you're a lawyer. What are you doing for your clients out there? And are you just in Texas or are you nationwide?
Yeah, we work nationwide. I mean, for commercial real estate, it's really just the paper, just contracts. I think it's anything but California. I don't like to want to do anything in California, but California is really wonky. I think they're one of the most intrusive. State law intrudes on commercial contracts. So, in Texas or Florida, I'm also licensed in Florida. A contract's the contract, and you can negotiate pretty much whatever you want. So it's not really dependent on state law. But California kind of introduces a lot of overriding statutory things. But yeah, so we do PSAs, we'll do triple net leases. We help investors, buy industrial properties really wherever they are, because we can review title and survey, loan documents, reviewing the leases, obviously, and deed restrictions. We can do all of that remotely.
And what type of transactions do you think you need an attorney on? Because there are some, like in Utah, if I buy a house, you really don't need an attorney.
Sure.
But on maybe a more complex triple net lease, then you should definitely have an attorney in your corner. Do you have kind of a barometer on that?
Yeah, I mean, we don't do really any like residential. I say any, but we do a couple of residential deals in the like 5 million plus, just because somebody's like, hey, I'm buying a big house. I just want somebody to put eyes on this just to be sure. HOAs, that sort of thing. But yeah, I think anything residential, unless there's a dispute, you really don't need an attorney, although we are trying to advertise for some more hourly services with this NAR settlement. I don't know if you guys have heard about this, and probably by the time this video comes out, it'll be July. But they agreed to not post the buyer 3% commission. And we think that's going to open up a lot more competition for the buy side, where if you find a house online, you go to Redfin, you go to an open house, great, I want to make an offer. You might just hire an hourly lawyer for $3,000, $5,000 to write the offer and see the transaction through to closing, instead of paying an agent $14,000. For what? I mean, I get it. They do provide services, but not everybody needs those services. And with the 3% baked in, you can't really negotiate. So you may as well just, take the discount. So we'll see if that opens up, but I'm going to be hiring more people if that type of work comes up, because we really specialize in commercial transactions where there's going to be phase one. You're going to have a PCA, property condition analysis, PCR. You may have environmental issues. You may have questions about zoning. And that's when you really need an attorney. You need an attorney to understand what the Alta survey looks like compared to the title commitment, and making sure that those match up. So any type of transaction where I think if you get a document that you don't understand, that's when you need an attorney. And that could be on a residential deal, but more likely it's just any type of commercial.
I like that. That's a good phrase. I see lots of documents that I don't understand, so I should probably call you more often.
you should just send it to me one time, because after I explain it, then you're going to know what it is for the future transactions. And I'm a big fan of this too, is overconsume third-party resources on your first couple of deals, because you don't know what you don't know. And I guarantee that my smartest or experienced clients, they don't need me to look at every single document in a transaction, but they need to know what they want to send me. And if you're doing your first couple of commercial deals or bigger numbers, you don't know what you don't know, and you don't want to be out sophisticated by the seller or the tenant on these deals. And that's kind of what happens in commercial, right? In residential, almost all the buyers or investors are more sophisticated than just lay people. And so there's a certain level of arrogance or confidence that I know what I'm doing. I'm better at running numbers. I can understand this lease better than the tenant. When you step into residential, especially as a new fish, suddenly that's taken away from you. And you're dealing with a seller that is potentially more sophisticated than you, smarter than you. And then you're dealing with a tenant that could also be more sophisticated, and you're just going to get slammed from both sides. That's where I think professionals really come in, handy, is the broker, insurance broker. You may have a debt broker, a lawyer. All these contracts are really important, and you just need to extract your piece of advice from each one.
I think that's sage advice. I think you could go to all of your vendors if you're a real estate developer or investment manager, talk to your securities attorney about what all of the documents are, and talk to your excavator about what he's looking for, your plumber, electrician. There's so many things, so many ways you can learn from people. So do you plan on doing a lot more law than real estate in the coming years, or are you thinking you want to focus more on the commercial real estate stuff, or do you go back and forth on it? What does the future look like for you?
It's a great question. I go back and forth on it because I love running the law practice. I don't feel stressed out by it. I don't want to give it up. But it's really funny, again, because if you asked me that 10 years ago or 5 years ago, maybe this is before I had kids, before things got really expensive, I was like, man, if I made what I made right now on real estate income, I would be thrilled. I would be over the moon. I'd be like, I'm done. Like, that's it. I've made it. But now I look at it, I'm like, I could survive, but it's like poverty fire or like lean fire, those like financial independence things.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's not that much. And so I think the future, I always said, was, okay, well, I'll stop when my real estate income like matches or exceeds my law. But the problem is the law just keeps growing, and, we've got the team, and
Terrible problem to have. Yeah.
It is, but then, you can make so much more on real estate just by scaling, buying bigger properties and such, that I think the future is the answer to your question is I'm going to keep doing both in metered, quantifiable sections, because I like both, and both of them provide different challenges to me. And I would say I love what I do, because Monday morning I get up and, I don't do anything that I don't like to do. So for me, that's a balance of law firm plus the real estate. And if I never sell, then I'll just keep adding more compliance and property management and asset management work.
I love it. Well, we'll get you back on in next year and see how much you've grown in both capacities. So
sounds good.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Tanner.